What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel, and in today's video we're going to talk about dodge and burn and frequency separation. Now, everybody does this a little bit different, but I've had a lot of people ask me how I get my skin to look so good, so I did want to kind of show you guys my method of doing it. If there's a different method that works best for you, go ahead and continue doing that, but this is how I do it, and I hope this teaches somebody how to do this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to grab my healing brush and then make sure your sample is current and below. And what you're going to do is you're going to go in, zoom in a little bit, and we're going to clean the skin off a little bit and get rid of some of these blemishes. So when doing this, when you hold Alt or Option, it gives you a little target, and you're going to click on a clean area of skin, let go, and then you're going to brush over the blemished area of skin. Now, it's very important to keep sampling next to the blemishes that you're removing. Don't just click once and then expect it to work perfect in every spot. You want to make sure you're sampling really close to the area that you want to fix. Okay, so I'm just going to go around and get rid of all of the noticeable blemishes before we get started in the frequency separation and the dodge and burn. Now, I will tell you, I don't really use a whole lot of frequency separation. I use it a little bit different than what everybody else does. I don't really like the look that frequency separation gives you when you use like the mixer brush and stuff like that. So if that's what you're looking for, sorry, I don't use that method. But I still think you should stick around and see exactly how I do this because it may teach you something. I can tell you right now, dodge and burn is probably by far the best way to do any type of retouching. It takes a little bit longer, but it also gives you a lot better results. Now, some people actually do this step in frequency separation. You can do that. I don't think it's really necessary, but if you think it gives you a little bit more control and gives you a little bit better outcome, by all means, you can go ahead and do so. Okay. Again, I'm just sampling from a clean area of skin that's nearby, and then I'm brushing over the blemishes. And you want to make sure that the texture that you're sampling from is exactly the same as the texture that you're brushing over, or that should be underneath the blemish. Like if I zoom in here and I try and grab like an area underneath the eye here, and I try and brush it down here, it's not going to look right because it's a different type of texture. And if you mess up like that, all you have to do is just hit Control or Command Z to go back, and then that'll take you back to the last step. Okay, so continuing on, I could fast forward through all this, but I have had a few people ask me not to. They'd like to see the whole process, and I'm fine with that. The nice thing about YouTube is you can actually fast forward through this if you don't want to see this process. I just think some people learn better when they can actually see the whole process being done. And that's fine. It makes for longer videos, but if you're okay with sitting through it, then I'm okay with doing it for you. Now, this isn't really a blemish here, maybe this part here. I believe this might just be water, but I'm still going to remove it because it is distracting to me. And notice I'm using both sides of the area that I'm trying to remove. It just makes it a little bit more even when I do it that way. And you want to use either small like dots or small brush strokes. You don't want to like brush over a huge patch of skin. You just want to brush over, you want to make your brush about the same size as the problem area, and then just tap once or just drag a little bit. Okay, so I think that's pretty good there. So let's look at before and after. There's before, there's after. Okay, so that's our first step. Now the next step before I get into the frequency separation, I want to kind of fix these tones here. So you'll notice that there's some red in the skin. So I want to fix that. So if we go down here to our adjustment layers, go to hue saturation, grab this little hand tool, click on the skin, and that's going to show you what color that the skin is. And it's obviously in the reds. And then we can pull the hue all the way over. And the only reason we're doing this is because we want to know exactly what area of the image it's selecting. And we'll turn it back to normal here in a second. So on the right hand side of this layer, on the bottom, if you take this slider and you start pulling it in, it's going to start selecting different areas. So I'm going to just kind of pull it to where I think it's selecting all of the reds that I want to get rid of. So like maybe right there. And then I can pull this back, pull the hue back to 0. And now we have our selection. So after we have our selection, you're going to take the hue. If you're trying to get rid of reds, you're going to move it to the right. And I think maybe right there looks pretty good at +9. So if I turn this off and on, you see it takes care of most of those reds. Now the only problem that we have here is her lips are selected and we want her lips to be red. So make sure you click on this layer mask, hit B for the brush tool, and you're gonna either hit X or hit this little button down here to switch between black and white. You want black as your foreground color. Paint with 100% flow and opacity. And just paint that color right back in to the lips. Now if they have rosy cheeks, you can also bring the flow down to, let's say, like 12%, 10%, and then just gradually kind of bring that back in. And she doesn't have rosy cheeks, so I'm not really going to do that, but that is an option that you can do. Alright, so now that we have that part done, if there's any other parts in your image, in mine there aren't any other red parts in the image, if there's any in yours, you want to make sure you mask those areas out as well. Alright, so we got rid of our reds. Now, a lot of times you'll see some yellowing in certain areas too. And I don't see a whole lot of that, but sometimes it is kind of hard to see. So I'm actually going to create another hue saturation. So go down to your adjustment layers, hue saturation, grab the hand tool, click on the skin again, and then pull the hue all the way over again. Now this time what we're going to do different is instead of pulling the right hand side of this slider, we're going to pull the left hand side of the slider, and that's going to help us identify those areas that may be a little bit too yellow. So maybe right about there. So we know, hit B for the brush tool. So we know that there's quite a bit of yellow in this area here, obviously in her hair, so we're going to have to mask that out because we want to keep the yellow in her hair. And then just some other areas around the image. So let's go ahead and bring this back to 0. And then instead of taking it to the right to make it more yellow, we're going to bring it to the left and make it a little bit more red. So maybe around -10, that looks pretty good. And then again, we need to brush with a black brush onto the mask at 100% and mask out the hair because we don't want to change the color in the hair at all. Alright, so I'm going to hold shift and make sure I have both of these layers selected, and then I'm going to hit either Control or Command G, and that's going to create a group, and I'm going to rename this group to skin color, and you can name it whatever you want. I just like to name a lot of my layers and groups so I don't get lost. If I ever need to come back, it just makes it a little bit easier. So we can actually name this one blemishes. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do here is let's go ahead and make a stamp visible of everything that we just did. What you're going to do is you're going to hit Shift, Option, Command E, and that's going to take everything that you just did and it's going to put it in its own layer. So after you do that, hit Control or Command J to duplicate that layer and turn this top layer off. We're going to create this frequency separation. So click on your bottom layer. We'll name this color. And what we want to do is we want to go to Filter, Noise, and Median. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take out all of the texture in the skin. And I already have it set up. It's at 21. That's actually pretty good for this image. If I go back here, like to say 13, you'll notice that there's still a little bit of texture in there, so we want to make sure we get rid of it all. So around 21 for me is where it's good. So I'm going to hit OK. And then go to your top layer, turn that one back on. We're going to name this one Texture. Hit Enter. And then we're going to go to Image, Apply Image, and then under Layer, you're going to click on the layer that is right underneath it, so the one that you just blurred out, which in my case is going to be called Color. And then you want to make sure that your blending mode's probably going to be on normal. You want to change it to Subtract, and you should see a gray layer if you do it correctly. Opacity should be at 100%, scale it to offset 128. Okay, go ahead and click OK. And then you're going to change the blend mode of this top layer to linear light. And then you can hold Shift and select both of these layers, hit Control or Command G to put those in a group, and then rename this group FS or frequency separation. So there's your frequency separation layer. Now if I zoom in here and I turn this off and then turn it back on, you're not going to notice a difference at all because all we did was we separated the color from the texture. That's all we did. So now I'm going to work on this bottom layer, my color layer, and all I'm going to do, it's going to be super simple. Grab my lasso tool. Again, make sure you have your bottom or your color layer selected. And you're just going to lasso everywhere that you see open skin. Okay? And you can hold Shift and it'll add like a little plus sign on your lasso here. And that means that you can add to the selection. Keep holding it down, don't let go, because if you let go, then you're going to ruin your whole selection. Okay, so I'm just going to continue to grab different areas of the skin. And notice I'm not grabbing like the eyes or anything like that. I'm just grabbing the skin. Now over here, I do have the eye selected. So what you're going to do is you're going to hold the Alt or the Option, and you're going to see a minus, and then you're going to take that out of your selection. Same thing with the eyebrow here. And then you can keep going back and forth. Like I'm going to hold Shift, and then I'm going to add this area in here. Okay. And then I'll add her hand, her arm here, this hand. And like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. All we're doing is we're just going to kind of blur this down to mix the color together a little bit. So now that we have everything selected, I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to start moving this up and down. Like if I go all the way up here, see how crazy that looks? We obviously don't want to go that far, but we do want to kind of smooth the color underneath the texture. And the reason why we do it this way is because we're going underneath the texture. So 5.8 looks pretty good. I hit Control or Command D. And we're going underneath the texture. So if I turn this off and on, you notice it just smooths it just a little bit, but none of the texture has been touched. Only the color. Okay? And that's really all I'm going to do with the frequency separation. The rest of it we're going to do in Dodge and Burn, but I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to want to grab some coffee because, or some kind of drink because it's going to take a while. All right, so to make our Dodge and Burn layers, we're going to go down here to our adjustment layers, grab a curves adjustment layer, pull down on the curve to darken, and then this step's a little bit different than what you've probably seen in other tutorials. I'm going to go into my blend mode and I'm going to change it to luminosity. Now the reason why I do that is because I don't want to affect any of the color in the image at all. I just want to affect the lightness or darkness. So I'm going to make sure my layer mask is selected, hit Control or Command I, and there is our burn layer. So we'll go ahead and label that burn. I'll create another curves layer, and instead of pulling it down, I'm going to pull it up, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to change the blend mode to luminosity, and then make sure your mask is selected, Control or Command I, and now you're technically ready to do the dodge and burn. But we're going to make a few other layers to kind of help us out. So the first layer we're going to do is we're going to do a solid color layer, and then we're going to grab anything grayscale, so anything without any color in it, hit OK, and then change that blend mode to color. And all we did there was, if I turn this off and on, all it's doing is it's pulling the color out of the image, but it's not changing the tonality at all. If I used a black and white layer, it would change the way that Photoshop actually renders the colors. This way you're just pulling the color out and you're leaving the grayscale. Alright, so next we're going to grab another curve layer, and this is going to be our working curve. And what I mean by that is I'm going to pull the bottom down, and then I'm going to pull it up on the top. And what I'm looking for now is to get as much contrast as I can before we start dodging and burning. And we're actually going to keep moving this around. We might move it around a couple times throughout the edit. And let's go down here and name this Dodge, hit enter. And we're going to move this around a couple times during the edit just so we can see things a little bit better. It's not going to affect the final image at all. So I'll start with my dodge. You're going to bring the flow of your brush all the way down to 1%. Make sure you have a white brush. Zoom in just a little bit. And then you're just going to start evening out anywhere where there's like a dark shadow or a harsh line. And we're just going to darken and lighten all these little areas to smooth out the tones. So I'll zoom in quite a bit for you guys so you can kind of see what I'm doing. I know for some reason when I do these recordings, it doesn't always show my brush strokes if I don't zoom in. So right now I'm just working with my dodge and I'm just brightening some of these areas that look like they're too dark and trying to get them to the same brightness of what's around it. And here in just a couple seconds, I will show you before and after on just a small part that we've done right here on our chin. And this is just using the dodge. So if I turn this dodge off and on, see how it just kind of smooths it out? This is really, in my opinion, by far the best way to smooth somebody's skin out. Alright, so I generally like to move around the image. I don't like to stay in one spot, just because if I stay in one spot too long, I start to kind of see things that aren't there or not see things that are there. So I tend to move around quite a bit. Okay. Now, this part of her jawline, I actually want that still to be kind of dark, but all I want to do is just even it out. And I may actually just even it out as much as I can and then darken it back down again. So maybe like that. It's looking pretty good. And now I'm gonna grab my working curve and I'm gonna pull this down just a little bit more here. And I'm gonna work in these brighter areas here. So make sure when you do that, you go back to your dodge layer, your burn layer, whichever layer you're working on. And you're going to want to adjust that curve as much as you can to see these different discrepancies in the skin tones. Because if you just leave it like this, you're not going to see certain things in certain areas. So if I would have left it how it was, I wouldn't be able to see where these areas were too bright. So I'm just kind of burning down some of these areas. Okay. Okay. And I'm kind of trying to shape this jawline just a little bit too. I don't want to change the shape of her face, but I do want to kind of straighten out the line that's on here and maybe extend that shadow out a little bit more. All you're doing when you're dodging and burning is you're just changing the way that the light and shadow hits the face. Now, if you go overboard with this, you can really wreck somebody's face. Just being honest. So that's why I choose to use a flow of 1%, so that way I'm not going overboard. And this is going to be the first step in the dodge and burn. This is just the micro dodge and burn. So I use micro dodge and burn, and then I also use global dodge and burn. And the difference between the two is the fact that right now, using the micro dodge and burn, I'm just fixing areas of the skin that the tones are off. And in global dodge and burn, you're actually going to emphasize the highlights and shadows on the face or on the body. So don't spend like 3 hours dodging and burning on somebody's face and then not do the rest of their body, because if you do that, it's just going to look kind of weird. And like I said, you don't have to go crazy with it. You don't have to go overboard. But if you're going to do the face one way, you have to make sure you do the rest of the body the same way. Now, she has like a little line here, and I'm just lightening that up a little bit. And that's going to kind of get rid of that line. And then I'm going to grab my burn, and right in this area here, I want to burn this down. And notice I kind of went over to this side and then came back over here. Again, I don't want to stay in the same area for too long because I won't be able to see what's going on. All right. And I'm just basically taking it one brush stroke at a time. I'm not like brushing really, really hard anywhere. Now, I'm not using a Wacom tablet. I have one for this tutorial. I'm not using it though. It is helpful to be able to have the flow and opacity sensitivity on, but it's really not necessary, especially if you're doing this at 1%. It might take a little bit longer, but it's not necessary. All right, so moving on to the forehead. And I'm just going to dodge these areas down. Okay. And you just want to make sure that you know where there's supposed to be light and where there's supposed to be shadow. Because if you dodge where there's supposed to be shadow, then it's going to start to look really weird. All right, so maybe a little bit up here on the forehead. And you want to kind of zoom in and out. And I'll show you why here in just a second. So I got most of this done, zoomed in. Again, just evening out the tones. All right, now when I zoom out, now I see some other areas that need worked on. So I need to burn down, I'll zoom in just a little bit more here. I need to burn down this area here, maybe a little bit here, a little bit here. I'm almost just tapping and dragging once, and then picking up the brush, tapping, dragging once, and just keep going back and forth that way. And that's going to be kind of the best technique that I've found to make sure that you're doing it evenly. Now, above the eyebrow, there is a little bit of a bright spot, and that's because that area of your skin is typically pushed out a little bit, so it's going to get a little bit more light. So don't burn that whole thing down, because if you do, it's not going to look right. Same thing over on this side. You can even out the tonality there, but you don't want to burn it completely down. Okay. And I'm going to go back to my working curve again, and I'm going to bring the shadows up a little bit. maybe to about right there. And then I'm going to grab my burn. And now that I'm zoomed out, I see a couple spots that I could probably dodge. Okay. It's very important to move that curve around so you can see exactly what's going on and get more contrast in the areas that you're working on. Now there's a transition from light to dark, so you have your light and then shadow on this side and then also over here. Again, you don't want to flatten that transition down. You don't want to flatten this highlight either. You just want to make it a smooth transition, and that's going to make the skin look smoother. So I'm actually going to dodge this highlight just a little bit underneath here. And maybe a little bit up there. Just to smooth it out a little bit. And notice I'm zoomed out like 35%. And the reason for that is because this is how most people are going to look at your pictures. They're not going to zoom in to 100, 200%. It's just not going to happen. But if you do need to get in and do some detail work, you can do that, but I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time there. Unless you're doing like really high-end beauty retouching. It'll take you forever, but that's pretty much what they do. They go in on a pixel-based level and they really start to, like if I go in here, like all these little spots here, they would go in and dodge like here, and they would get rid of that pretty much everywhere. And they would just really start to work on these tones, and then they would also bring this working curve down quite a bit like that to where they can see quite a bit easier what they're doing. Now I'm not going to do this on the whole image. I just want to kind of show you what you can achieve using dodge and burn just on maybe this one side here. But this would be more like high-end beauty retouching by doing it like this. And I'm just dodging these areas and trying to get the tones to match as much as I can. Alright, so that's enough of that. Let's change our working curve back like this. And I'm going to turn the working curve off and our color layer off. And then I'm actually going to put all this in a group. So I'm going to grab this bottom layer, hold shift, grab our top layer of our working curve, and hold Command G. And then we'll call this dodge and burn. So DB. I'll open this back up. Now let me turn this off and on. And that makes a world of difference, just that little bit that we did right there. So if I turn it off and on, see how it just really starts to smooth the skin down quite a bit? I think we're almost done with this. The only thing I want to do now is I'm going to dodge a little bit more on the forehead. And then I also want to dodge a little bit more, or I'm sorry, I want to burn a little bit on the nose here in a second. And I'll kind of explain that. let me just even this out up here. And you constantly want to be changing your brush size to kind of work with whatever area you're working with. So if you think you need a smaller brush, make it smaller. I'm just using the left and right bracket keys, and that's allowing me to change the size on the fly instead of having to, you know, click here and then, adjust the size or going all the way up here and adjusting it. Just use your bracket keys. It makes it a lot easier. I'm actually going to burn this down over here just a little bit. I think it's slightly distracting. Okay. All right, so on the nose, what I was getting ready to tell you, if I go over to the bridge of the nose here, remember how we said we can kind of reshape the face? So sometimes what I will do is I'll adjust this highlight that's on the nose and see how this shadow is kind of crooked, like the shape of that shadow is crooked. I actually want to burn this down just a little bit and get that shadow almost into a straight line. And we're just pretty much shading the nose. And by doing this, we're going to make the nose look a little bit slimmer. We're not going to completely change it, but we're going to make it look a little bit slimmer than what it actually is. And this step is optional. I know I'm going to get some people in the comments might get mad at me doing this, but I'm just showing you what's possible. And I think that looks pretty good so far. And I'm going to darken down the shadow on the side of the nose a little bit. And then maybe down under the eye here, maybe I'll grab my Dodge and just kind of smooth this out just a little bit. And I'm going to make kind of a line on the nose here. And right now, again, I'm just kind of shaping what I can. I don't want this highlight so bright here on the tip of the nose, so I'm just going to burn that down just a little bit. Okay, almost done. So now when I show you this before and after, you're going to see that we didn't really change a whole lot, but it just kind of made it look a little bit smoother and a little bit slimmer. Alright, so let me turn our helper layers off, and then I'm going to turn this off and on. So off and on. And I feel like I may have went a little bit too far on the nose, but that's okay. What I can do is I can add, groups can actually have layer mask too. So I can add a layer mask to the group, bring my flow up to maybe like 9%, and then I'm going to brush with black, making sure this layer mask is selected on the nose here. And let's turn that off and on. And I think that actually looks pretty good there. So off, on. All right, so now it's all smoothed out. So that was our first set of dodge and burn. So that was like our micro dodge and burn. So now we can do the same exact thing. Grab curves, pull it down, switch it to luminosity, hit Controller Command I, grab another curve, pull it up, switch it to luminosity again, hit Controller Command I to hide, and this time what we're going to do, let me make this global dodge, and then this is global burn. Okay, so I'm going to grab my dodge, I'm going to change my flow, this time probably around 4%. I'm going to zoom out, and then anywhere that there's already a highlight, I'm just going to simply brush with a white brush over that area, like that, just a few times, maybe down the nose here. Then on the cheek, making my brush really big. And then maybe this cheek here. And then down here on the chin. And then I'm going to grab the burn, and I'm going to go anywhere that there's a shadow and kind of emphasize the shadow just a little bit, like that. And a little bit underneath the lip, and along the side of the face here. And this may be too much, but that's okay. We can actually pull back the opacity. Now I'm going to burn down maybe on the arms here a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and group these. Hold Shift, grab both of these layers, hold Command G, and then we'll label this Global Dodge and Burn. Now let's turn that off and then turn it on. And it just, see, it just kind of adds some depth. And we're going to pull the opacity back maybe to about 70%, maybe, right around there. I think that actually looks pretty good. All right, so let's look at our complete before and after. So there's before, that's what we started with, and then there's after. All right, so the next thing we can do, now that that part, that's pretty much the end of the tutorial, but the next thing I want to do is I just want to kind of color it a little bit. I'm just going to grab a gradient map, and these are actually built into Photoshop. I'm just going to grab this one here and maybe pull the opacity all the way back, bring it up to like maybe 8%, like that. Turn that off and on. Maybe like 5. That kind of mutes that just a little bit. And then I'm going to grab a selective color layer. And then if you haven't seen any of my other tutorials, I actually have another tutorial on how I make color pop. That tutorial actually comes with a download. You can download this little color pop action. So go check that out. I think it's one of the first ones that I did, and it's right in the title. It says free color pop action. So all this color pop does is it basically adds saturation. So if I turn that off and on, you're going to see it added quite a bit of saturation there. And I'm actually going to pull this back, and the only thing I'm looking at right now is the skin. So I want that at around maybe 47%. That works for me. Then I'm going to hit Controller Command J and duplicate that and turn it all the way up. And now all I'm looking at is the background. So I want that background pretty blue like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my flow all the way up to 100%. I'm going to brush with black, and I'm just going to take it off of her skin here. Just like that. And then I can actually grab maybe a black and white layer and then turn that to luminosity. These are all optional steps, but if you guys want to keep following along, that's fine. And all I'm going to do now is I'm bringing down the reds a little bit and then bringing up the yellows. And if I turn that off and on, it just adds a little bit of contrast. And then maybe even bring down the blues. See how that just kind of darkens those a little bit. I don't want to go too far or it starts breaking. Maybe bring down the cyans just a little bit. So now I'll turn this off and on. And maybe bring the opacity back to maybe like 60%. And then I can actually go back into my global dodge and burn. And I'm actually going to burn with maybe 4%, like the bottom of her lip here. Make sure you're brushing with white. Burn that down just a little bit there, and maybe a little bit there. And that there. And then I'm going to grab my dodge. And then I'm just going to kind of emphasize this highlight here. And then right up on top of the lip here, I'm just going to go over that white line there just a little bit. And then same thing down here at the bottom. Turn that off and on. And let's work on the eyes a little bit. So again, with the dodge, I'm just going to dodge the eyes just a little bit here. And I know this eye is out of focus. As long as the eye that's closest to you is in focus, it's okay. Generally, you want both eyes in focus, but it's okay as long as you have the eye that's close to the camera in focus. It's generally pretty acceptable. So I'm going to grab my eyedropper tool here. I'm going to click on the bottom layer. I'm going to sample the color of the eye. And then I'm going to go to the top and create a solid color layer, and that should give me the color that I sampled. Hit OK. Hit Control Command I with the mask selected. And then change this to color dodge. Grab your brush tool and at 100% just brush right in the eye here and here. Now that looks kind of crazy right now, but we can change the opacity, bring it all the way down, and start bringing that up a little bit just to add a little bit of color in there, maybe around 30%. And then I'm going to grab another curves adjustment layer. I'm going to pull this down and then pull this up and do like a pretty heavy S curve here, but I want to make sure that I can still see the light in there. Hit Control Command I, and then I'm going to brush just on the bottom here, and that's going to add some contrast into the eyes. Alright, and that's it. That's the end of this tutorial, and I hope this helps you guys out. And if it did, please like, subscribe, give this a thumbs up, hit the bell, do all that crazy stuff, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.